one of the things with Eventcaster and Bountycaster and Launchcaster that I feel like is maybe still underappreciated is the name or are the names, right? So they have caster in the name. And, this is like somewhat of a function of just, we were all around really early on and we didn't know what to call our products. And there was no other product with that name or doing that thing that we were doing, whether it's, product launches or events or bounties. And so we just called it, like the meme, right? Because caster is a meme, or has been, right? Like parent caster, is like, a way of saying like, hey parents, like, what do you think about this? And so,
Right.
so anyway, so yeah, that's kind of like how these things evolved, right? But really like what they are, like, which was not at all the intention of me, and I suspect the others, is that like they are this default position. And so, when someone comes along and says, hey, I'm going to do bounties on Farcaster, or hey, I'm going to do events on Farcaster, well, maybe they can do that, or maybe they're successful, but there is this default already, right? Which is, because it's in the name, because it's just like the thing that everyone knows and uses, like it is the default. And I think that has been like actually, a benefit, right? In terms of just adoption within the ecosystem. And so it served the product really well to be like the event tool for Farcaster. And it also helps that we have @event, right? Which is the other piece of this. But for a few reasons, Eventcaster is not the best name, especially going forward. One is that it's a little bit hard to say. So it's like Eventcaster is a very long name. And to anyone outside of Farcaster, they don't get it. They're like, why is it called that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I have this strategy or plan, which will become, a little bit clearer kind of in the months ahead, which is to not just serve Farcaster, but also to serve other platforms that on-chain creators might use, right? So you might have a Telegram community, you might have a Discord server, you might have a WhatsApp channel, you might have a Twitter presence. And, you do things with your community and those people like exist across all these platforms. And ideally, you shouldn't have to do any extra work to coordinate with them, on those other places too. And, if it's Eventcaster that you're dealing with on like Telegram, let's say, well, that kind of doesn't make any sense, right? Because like, what's the point of having the caster name on Telegram, right? And so where I've kind of been going with this, I think there's a broader rebrand that will happen, like just as like a movement that I'm kind of starting here, which we can get into. But in the short term, I think what needs to happen is that the event bot needs to take center stage. And Eventcaster as the name kind of needs to maybe fade a little bit just to be like events on Farcaster, whereas EventBot is the thing that really ascends to be like the core part of the product that people already do interface with, but like interface with on different platforms and can talk to and can use to make events and whatnot. And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. But look out for that change, I guess. Maybe by the time this releases, it will already be in place, but I'll probably start moving more towards that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've like sort of a few questions on that. It's just that's a very helpful context. I would say that I even, I'm pretty into Farcaster. Obviously, I was sort of unaware of. I hadn't thought of the fact really that I mean I was aware that there was a bunch of companies or products with cast or caster in the name, but I never really thought of this as sort of like a universal rebrand thing that might be going on. And I never connected. Well, I didn't know that you guys were sort of doing something like this, and the only one I was really aware of was Bountycaster, and I thought that was more about getting away from being viewed as only bounties, and towards sort of more of a Craigslist type of thing, more to do with like sort of the bounty part of it, perhaps, than like the caster part. But I'm sure it's somewhat of both. So one thing, just to sort of like define the universe that we're talking about here, just like a simple question is this like you mentioned, Eventcaster, Bountycaster, Launchcaster, are those sort of like the power law players in this, include caster in their name, or maybe you include like Supercast or something, which isn't caster, but it's cast. Is that sort of like the power law group, or is there really like a large number of these that are like all doing, reasonably similarly well? Like, is there basically another bunch of them worth mentioning, or are those sort of like the core ones?
No, I think at this point it's much broader. And there are even some products that have been around for a long time that, or are built by Farcasters who have been around for a long time that are worth mentioning. Like for example, Hypersub is the one that comes to mind. Like Johnny's a good friend of mine, and and it's one of the more widely accepted products in the space. And doesn't have Caster in the name, which is probably a good idea, right? In terms of expansion.
Right.
I think it's I again, like just to go back to the original thing I said, like it wasn't like an intentional choice as like a strategy, right? It just so happened that like everyone called their thing Caster, and like that was what just stuck and has become a meme. And for better or
Right.
worse, like that's the meme. And so I don't think, and I don't know what Linda and Daniel are thinking on Bounty Caster, like in terms of a rebrand, but like it's just kind of how the meme evolved, and it's just funny that like it's just underrated, and like don't think too much about it, but there is this like position that they occupy. And so a lot of those default like products that people use do have that property, but not all of them. And I think that'll change, especially as these things mature into real products, right? And not just like small community projects that were built on top of this tiny community, right? They're hopefully all of them will mature into really widely used products around the world, and that probably comes with this aspect of growing up with of having a unique brand that is not Farcaster limited. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
wonder, is you talked about like EventBot, right? And like you could another sort of platform you'd like to be involved with would be um, Telegram potentially. Not that that's the only one, but that's sounded like it's one that might be top of mind. And I wonder, like, I don't know, this might be kind of dumb, but um, like, is the name of the overall thing even that important, or might it be actually a good idea to sort of brand, incorporate the network that you're serving into the brand name in each network that you're serving? So for example, like maybe it is Eventcaster still on Farcaster and there's an event bot, and then like I don't know what the equivalent would be called on Telegram, but it might also be called event bot on Telegram, but like I don't know if you need to have like sort of a dedicated page for the product or something. And maybe that's, I don't know, maybe event bot could work actually, or else maybe it's just like, I don't know, for lack of a better quick name, like Eventgram or whatever. And it's like, you could
uh-huh.
sort of white label this sort of generic, like if you're trying to become like the default events product across all of these different networks and platforms, maybe you can just be like sort of events, and then you're like sort of white labeling onto each network to make it feel like it's more native rather than having to pick something that necessarily works across all of them besides like the generic term of events. Does that like make any sense at all, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean it's hard to say like what the right path is there, just because I'm less active on Telegram, and what will fit with each of the communities there, you never really know. But what I guess, like for me, the more important thing than the platform brand is the creator's brand and the community and the club, or whatever that thing is that's using it. And I think it's important to recognize that on Farcaster today, like the monoculture that, or the very small, like tiny early adopter culture is it's this Farcaster enthusiast club of sorts, right? And now there are kind of starting to become other clubs and communities and factions on the protocol. But like for the longest time, right, it was just that core group. And so the idea of Eventcaster is maybe less about the protocol as a platform and more about the early adopter community. Um, and I think for the product, right, if you use the product in the feed, what you'll notice is that like there is almost no branding of Eventcaster or Events XYZ or the event bot like in the feed when you see it. It's entirely meant to take on the brand of the club or the creator or whoever is using it. And so I think much more about like, rather than the platform is how can we take on the brand of the creator or the brand that's using it, and then make sure that is seamlessly made clear across all platforms that we eventually support.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like this might not be the right word for it, but it's almost like being the events protocol where whoever
Yeah.
wants to pick it up just uses it. It's like, email doesn't have like a brand. It's just email. It's what you use to send messages to people. And then there's Gmail and whatever. And so like, events could be sort of like the equivalent of email. And this is just like, if you're doing things on chain, and you want to schedule events, like this is just what you're using. Like there's no other alternative that like you'd have to like force some other alternative, basically. I think sounds like it would be somewhat of the goal. But are there other networks, like you mentioned Telegram, but are there others that come to mind? I know like Lens is out there. I haven't been, I'm assuming you haven't been either as active there as Farcaster. I feel like at a certain point, like maybe 2.5 years ago or whenever it was, I think I signed up for both like roughly around the same time and was like playing around with both. And I don't remember exactly why or how, but I just basically ended up using Farcaster increasingly a ton to where it's now like my primary social network, social app that I'm using. And Lens I haven't like touched in, since probably a few months after I started it. But I know there's other people who have, gone in the other direction. It sounds or it seems like there is a very real network over there that has its own sort of like characteristics. But beyond those two, like there's not like really, to my knowledge, like these really thriving, social networks within crypto. There's obviously like the blockchain communities themselves, and then there's all these, Discords and Telegrams and whatever. Is that sort of the universe, or are there other, areas you have in mind near term that are worth sort of like focusing on or expanding into?
Yeah, so you kind of brought up 2 points of like ecosystems to expand to, and then also like on-chain events protocols. So maybe I'm going to answer them in reverse here, which is, I don't know too much about Lens. I don't use it at all. I don't even think I have a handle on there. I think it might be valuable to just have a place there if creators are using it, but I not like the biggest. I don't know. I just like not very involved with Lens. Don't really know too much about them. But what I would say is, just expanding to Ethereum in general, right? Like, very specifically, right? Just allow addresses on Ethereum or even Solana or sorry, to RSVP to events is like one obvious slam dunk thing that we can do. And using like, I think it's called Open Frames, right? By David Furlong and his company. We can have frames like the event frame, right? Can extend to other places that use XMTP, Base Names app, I think uses it now. And, I don't have any insider information, but I would bet at some point the rest of Coinbase properties might also use frames. I had an exchange with Mike from Rainbow, where he said that it's on their list to support frames in Rainbow. And obviously, XMTP itself, right, has their own set of apps, including Lens, right? And so I think just by supporting Ethereum and XMTP and open frames, like we can kind of start to get out, to the broader on-chain ecosystem. And then the other piece of this, which there's a really good podcast that Mike and Dan from Farcaster did, Moment of Zen. It's like an episode, and they talk about like these messaging protocols like XMPP and Farcaster's eventual DirectCast thing, and they're starting to get integrated in various places like Coinbase Wallet, right, has XMPP built in. And Mike makes this point that like, the chatting is not actually really the interesting thing about it, right? We have all these other chat, apps that we use already. The interesting thing is notifications and updates, and the fact that you can send a notification to your on-chain, your 1,000 true fans on chain, or the people that are participating in your thing. And the fact that that can be integrated in places like Coinbase Wallet or wherever else you happen to use Ethereum or Solana or whatever, right, is really powerful. And so I think like for us, right, the product has 2 properties, which is right, the event frame, which you share in the feed or in group chats, and then this bot that kind of messages you and takes actions and reminds you to do stuff. And so to be able to have both of those things present in any app that uses Ethereum or might use it is really, really powerful. And so expanding to that is something that will definitely be happening, hopefully by this month or next month, but very quickly. And then kind of expanding on that, like, to the point you were asking about the on-chain events protocol, that is the eventual goal. The original, like way back when I first had the idea of using Eventcaster, like the original name for it was in the same way that Farcaster's original name is RSS Plus. I was thinking about this as iCal Plus, right? Because I think it's called CalDAV or something like that, right? There's this standard that calendars today run on, that Apple, Google, like their servers run on. And the idea and the question I was asking is like, what if you upgraded that to use Ethereum, right? What if you had like really great identities and rich layer of social graph and identity layer for all the people using it, and then also like you had tickets, you had payments, you have all this stuff just built right in. Like I think that's a really cool idea. And then to be able to have this giant global calendar that you can just pull down whatever the things are that correspond to you and update them and coordinate and just have this single layer for all human group coordination is really, really powerful. And so that's kind of where eventually I want to take it. But it's very hard, it's hard to get there, right? And so it's like, what are the 10 steps that need to happen? The first one is Eventcaster and getting the event bot out there and expanding it.
Yeah, it's that's super interesting actually. I never thought of like I mentioned email obviously, but I never thought of calendar, which is it's like sort of a secondary product arguably behind email. I mean, there's obviously other products as well, but in terms of these sort of like digital primitive type stuff, like protocol type stuff, calendar is sort of this like somewhat underestimated, I feel like, second place behind email in that it is, sort of there is that protocol. I guess I wasn't familiar with like the actual thing, but if you think about it, like all of your calendars, whether it's like a Gmail or an Outlook or whatever, like you can get them picked up on your iCalendar by Apple, like you said, and it's surprisingly like sort of interoperable, and that's what crypto makes so much like better and easier in a lot of ways. And so I'm just thinking like, I don't know, I didn't realize how maybe obvious of an opportunity that was, and I don't think other people realize that as well. Obviously it's not that obvious, but it's just like it sort of has a great precedent. And I wonder, like you said, like you have like sort of these 10 things you have to kind of do to get there. I'm wondering like what the most interesting element, not that you necessarily have like an answer to this, but just thinking about like what's the most interesting element of that like long-term vision, that seemingly complex vision that has like 10 steps required to get there. And like, is it possible to exhibit, one or two of them without having to do all 10 of the things? Like, what's the most like, wow, that actually works like that sort of thing? Because I'm just thinking like there's the precedent is there, like we said, with, even if you just have like an Outlook calendar. I remember like my old job, I haven't been in one of these sorts of jobs in a while, but my old job, working on a classic team of however many people, and like everyone wants to share each other's calendars with like the various permissions and whatever. And you're sort of just like, roughly analogously speaking, you're sort of like adding friends and like setting permissions and whatnot. And this would seem like something that could be done, not too difficult with what you're doing. And people just, instead of their email address, which is sort of the ID for, traditional like Web2 calendars, if you will, you're going to be using, currently you would be using like Farcaster, F names, but it sounds like soon you might be using, you might use that, but you might also use base names, or you might use ENS names, or in lieu of any of those things, you would just use the raw Ethereum address. And this is one of these things, well, I should pause there probably if you have any thoughts, because there's sort of like enough there. And then I have like a kind of materially different direction I'm curious to hear your thoughts on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess maybe the preface to all this is that like this is like a total work in progress, right? So I'm like inventing this in the moment, right? Like I as we speak. And I to be totally honest with you, I don't know what the right way is to, get this adopted everywhere. But one thing that I do know is that everyone has a calendar, right? And everyone has causes that they care about and creators that they care about. And increasingly, right, like all of marketing and all of, the way we get information and process information is routing around these internet brands, aka creators in some way, right? even startups, right, in a lot of ways. And and there's also this point of, going direct to your audience, right? That's one of the things that the internet lets you do. And I think of Ethereum as really just another side of that whole ecosystem. And so I think there is this need, right, to connect people with their fans and vice versa. And one of the really underrated things, like maybe the core insight of the product so far, is that word of event, right? Event on a calendar is actually a lot more broad than you might think, right? A lot more than just like happy hour or a conference can go on a calendar. And so
it's just units of time fundamentally.
Exactly. Every moment in your community, or as a creator, a club, a brand, a product, whatever, every moment that can go on a calendar is an opportunity for you to send out, this bat signal, get people to sign up and get engaged with your brand, send it to their friends, and then get a reminder to do something, right? So every single thing that you do, right, can be used to market yourself and get engagement. And I think flipping, on its head, right, this idea of like, oh yeah, join the Discord, and then, maybe 10 steps down the road, you sign up and you see, oh yeah, we do this thing at 10 a.m. Like that's kind of like, whatever that thing is, right? Whether it's like the dev call or the product launch, or like when we post our blog or when you publish your podcast, right? Like that is kind of the core thing that you use to run your life, right? Is that, the calendar, the schedule, and like what I do at X time of day, right? And to basically flip that on the head and use that as the way to send outward this like bat signal that I mentioned, right? And then get people engaged. Like that's kind of what the product does at a very, very basic level that like, maybe is somewhat underrated. And just to go back to something I said earlier, like none of this is obvious, right? I have done a very bad job of communicating it so far, but like that's kind of, now that I kind of have my head on straight with all that, that's kind of where things are going. And then, yeah, like down the road, right, in terms of like, what are the 10 things that need to happen? All of it kind of needs to happen, right? Need to get it onto every platform, need to, get people using it in every single community, right? Need to get it to become this like product that people know that does this like specific thing really well. But maybe more important than all of that is that I think like every startup, there's actually this blog post, maybe just for context, right, called Your Startup is a Movement by David Sachs. And it's got a giant picture of Elon right at the front of it, which, however people feel about Elon, the point is like he has built movements, right? That his companies are built on movements. And the whole blog post basically just goes, around this point of like, if you're starting a startup, you're fundamentally starting a movement. And for me, Giant Calendar Protocol or iCal Plus, that is not a movement, right? That is a tech product, right? That is a tech stack. Like that's not a movement. And for me, like a lot of the journey here, which goes back, and we can get into this, like what I was doing before Zencastr, a lot of this for me is figuring out like that movement that I'm starting, that I can own, that I can brand, that I can pitch to the world. And I think I have it, but like that to me, I don't think it's like Calendar Protocol. I think Calendar Protocol is the end state, right? Which is the way that all humans coordinate in groups, right? And stay updated and find out about things. But like there needs to be that movement that you want to sign up to, that you can buy into as an idea. And I don't think that's what it is. I think it's something else. And so I've been on this kind of like journey to figure that out and crystallize it in a product.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is like, there's a couple things, but one that I'm thinking about is I think people, calendars are sort of like these default things, and like, yeah, there's, Apple Calendar or iCal or whatever it is, and Google Calendar and all the rest. But they're all like roughly the same. Like no one is really straying from these sort of default decisions as to how an online, how a digital calendar should work. But I think a lot of people would be sympathetic to the view that it's not very good. Like it's at least it would be, seemingly worthwhile to test some of those assumptions. Like why are there these, and I'm sure they had good reasons for them. Like when they created the products, I'm sure they did some testing or whatever, but like, why are these meetings set for, 30 minutes or 50 or 15 or 45 or an hour. And then you have like even I actually just the other day signed up for cal.com, which good for them, like great
Totally.
domain. And I think it used to be like Cal and So or something. Um,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a
and
terrible name,
so
but they fixed it.
yeah, I mean, going from Cal and So to Cal is just like absolutely crushed it.
Yeah.
And obviously, everyone knows Calendly to the point where like Calendly is a verb roughly. It's like, send me your Calendly or whatever. And Cal just kind of like front ran them in a sense because it like send me your Cal is easier. And it's like, you might as if that's actually a product as well and it's roughly as good, then you might as well use it. And I was actually surprised because I'd had Calendly and used Calendly. I'm not scheduling like a ton of stuff in general, so I don't really use these products that much. But I wanted to use one for this actually for Purple Podcast for or Purple People for scheduling. I should probably get the name of my own podcast right, but I I wanted to use it for scheduling just to make it super easy to send a link and that's what I've used it for in the past is basically like a certain type of event. Like I don't use it for my
Mhm.
general calendar or whatever. And so I'd use Calendly, and Calendly on a free plan only lets you have like one type of event at a time, which generally was good for me. But right now I have like, a couple. And so cal.com, what's nice is like it allows you to use a few. And just as I was going through, these various, setting up the defaults and whatnot on cal.com, there's like some nice things I felt that were, and I think Calendly has these too, but it's like, setting a buffer between calls and these various things that are just, I think Cal and Calendly both are sort of a generation improved from the Googles or the Apples in terms of their calendars. And obviously Apple or Google like should be capable of creating better calendars, but they started earlier. So they have more like sort of defaults baked in and they're just not really incentivized to, experiment with as much as a Calendly or a Cal might be inclined to do. And so I feel like what's interesting in your situation is it's it can be like trying to think basically like people may give it a try because it's sort of like the crypto calendar or something um but then they might actually like it might stay and resonate and resonate with them and like retain them and get them to share it with their friends because you might have all like this ability to play with all of these different things where between Cal and Calendly like it's probably just going to be like you're probably just going to go with whichever one you sort of used first, unless one of them somehow became like 10x better than the other one. But
Mhm.
crypto as sort of like a baked in element, or like, you have people's identity is based on their Ethereum address or their ENS or their base name or their Farcaster ID instead of their email. That's like, it's not necessarily like a 10x improvement, but it's like it's like, on a different on sort of like a different axis, I guess, where it's
Mhm.
like that's enough. That can be enough to make someone make the switch, and then you have this opportunity, I think, to experiment with, what are better elements, what are things that what can we experiment with in terms of like how a calendar should work in the, in the most general sense, like you said, of like not just thinking about it in terms of events, but thinking about it in terms of helping people to better manage their time. I think that's like ultimately what I would want in the ideal calendar would be something that helps me to better manage my time. And I don't feel that the current set of digital calendar options, I don't really think that any of them do that. And I might be biased. Like some people might like absolutely love and rely heavily on their calendar. But for me personally, like the way that calendars work, they're most useful when they're empty. Like, and that's not that shouldn't really be, they should actually be useful to use, not to not use. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's kind of interesting. But I get what you're saying that like with the movement sort of philosophy that calendar, it's sort of hard to match movement and protocol, if you will, because a
Mhm.
protocol sort of by definition has to be, I feel like, somewhat generic, and a movement feels like it should be more specific and like mission driven. And so I sort of get why you're operating on the events side of things more specifically to start, and then that's sort of like a longer term vision. I'll stop there if there's anything else sort of worth touching on, but then I have another sort of question that's going to go a little bit off track.
Yeah, the only thing I would just add to that is just that, you think about the big products today, and big can be relative, right? So there's Apple and Google Calendar, right? You have Eventbrite, you have Luma, you have Partiful, you have Calendly, right? And Cal, which maybe is a special case because it's like kind of just the open source version of Calendly. But like, I think if you take each of those ideas, right? So Apple, Google, Cal, right? It's like the operating system native calendar. If you take, Partiful is parties, Luma is like ticketed events and conferences and happy hours. And then you take, Calendly, which is like the, send me a little business card that I can use to schedule a meeting. Each of those is like a spirit animal almost, right? Like it productizes like this thing that we do as humans. And I think it is very hard to beat someone at their own game. And so when to go back to like, how do you get those 10 steps, right? And like, how do you get this thing adopted? That's like maybe one of the biggest things that is sort of running through my head constantly is like, what is our spirit animal? Like, what is the thing that we productize that no one in the world will do better than we will, right? And like, what is that movement, right? To go back to the word used before, and I think it's just, yeah, I try not to try to, I try not to compare myself, for example, to Luma, if possible, right? Because there are actually a lot of people that use Luma and Eventcaster today together, and so try to think like, what is the thing that like we can do better than anyone else, and that we can really try to own and help, to bring about as a movement. So anyway, I'll stop there.
Do you have any sense for why someone who uses Luma and Eventcaster might be using both as opposed to just using one for all of the combined use cases?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So right now, this is the whole vision isn't in place, right? Because Eventcaster is not available on Telegram and and Discord and Twitter and all those places. But the idea, the kind of thesis is as a headless app, right? Which is to say that it works natively in whatever app you're using. The idea is that you really easily can fit into that technology platform. And so for Farcaster, right, you might create a Luma event, and then you might say, well, how do I get distribution for that event? A Luma event requires you to go to a website and sign up to something. And on Eventcaster, the whole product is that frame and the bot that reminds you, right, and the calendar extension. And so it's this like distribution layer for something like a Luma or a Partiful invite, right? And so it almost solves a different problem. They're like complements, I would argue. And there's a lot of different event products, right? Partiful and Eventbrite and plenty of others. And so it's not just limited to Luma, but that's one of the big ones. And so you can actually use these things alongside each other. And now they don't fully integrate and this and that, right? But they are that is why I think they're using both, right? Is that they realize that it's a lot easier to get signups in the feed and then remind people to do things when you use this like native little tool that works inside of Farcaster. That's one tap and then just sends you things automatically. And it's super easy to create in like seconds, right? But they also, they have external people right now, right, that they want to get to sign up to things. And so they kind of use Luma alongside it. That's kind of how people use it today.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the other thing I was going to say was, we talked about like sort of these 10 things, and I know it's just like a rough number or whatever, but I think I have my answer for maybe, I'm not obviously nearly as in the weeds, like, not even close to where you're at and thinking about all of this, but sometimes, also it can be sort of helpful to just have like an ignorant take. And I think the first thing that comes to mind for me that would be like kind of cool would be sort of like to basically answer the question of like, what's the minimum viable crypto like integrated calendar? Like what's the minimum viable like crypto element that we can add to something that is otherwise just the exact same basically as existing things in terms of calendars? And I think basically my answer to that would be something that allows me to very easily like ideally like 1, 2, or 3 click import all of my existing calendars, similarly to how, iCal lets you do that with any of your, Gmail or Outlook or whatever. So you can easily import all of your calendars into this, crypto calendar, if you will. And there's really like nothing different or special about it to start necessarily, or at least there doesn't need to be, other than the fact that like instead of being attached, this calendar, instead of like this overarching calendar, is attached to your Ethereum identity. Like very simple. Like it doesn't even need to have any functionality that can be enabled by that fact. It just like is that, and that's it. And then, obviously you can start to incorporate like Eventcaster with the frames, and those are populating this calendar and things like that. But I wonder like how hard it would be. Basically, I'm wondering like how do you take that 10-step plan and make it like a 1-step plan? And I wonder what would happen if you just like copy pasted existing calendar technology, like find something open source, and then just like, but like that could import all of these other calendars so that I myself, because like I said, like I'm not so, calendar, it is a bit of a, sticky thing, such as, wallets or, email or any of these things that are like sort of high friction to switch. But if it's an easy import, I personally don't really care. Like I already use like a Google Calendar and an Apple Calendar, and like I don't even really think about why or when I'm using either. It's basically just like, am I on my, if I'm on my phone, I'm probably just using the Apple one, and if I'm in a Google Chrome browser, I'll probably just use the Google one because it's like more convenient and I have it bookmarked or something. But they're all basically showing the same thing. They're all basically showing all of my calendars. And so if I could just easily get a crypto calendar, like sort of like up to parity with those, where it's including the stuff that I add on Apple or Google or whatever, and then it's also sucking in all of the crypto stuff that I'm doing, or, Eventcaster, EventBot sort of actions that I'm doing, then that would be like sort of an interesting first step, I feel like. And I'm not sure, it might be harder, it might be easier said than done, but at the very least, it feels like it's like a feasible step in that direction. That again, might be, some people might just be like, who cares? Like, this is the same thing. It just has my different identity. But honestly, like, I feel like I might care. Like, I feel like I might like that, just like, I think there's a fair number of people who want to sort of support to your point on like a movement. They just want to, they want to sort of like be crypto native in any ways that they reasonably can, because they believe in the future of crypto, even if things are really early and don't really even offer anything in terms of special features yet. There's more possibility that they might, and just like there's just a general desire to like sort of lean in on these crypto products, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. And admittedly, right, the product is not quite there yet, and it also doesn't do a great job of explaining that you can do stuff like this, but you can. And to the extent that it's not quite there yet, it will be. Like, this is exactly what I'm trying to do. And I'll just, I'll ask you a question, right? I'm assuming you have Discord because you're in crypto.
I do. I dislike it, but I have it.
And how many, just rough estimate, how many Discord servers are you in?
Well, I'm a bad user feedback here. I'm in like 4. Like I leave them mercilessly. I try not to use Discord at all.
Okay, so let's just,
most people
you're
have
probably
like 100,
in a bunch more.
50.
Exactly, right? Yeah, and you're probably in a bunch, and you probably prune them and that kind of thing. Like, I'm in like 50 of them, right? Like, I'm one of those people. I think a lot of the people in crypto, especially, the people on Farcaster, can relate to this, right? We're in a ton of Discord servers. And each one of those Discord servers is a community that does things, right, that you might want to stay on top of. And your connection to those Discord servers, like on Discord, right, is your Discord username or whatever. But like, really, it's your Ethereum address, right? Like if you're a part of Nouns, right, like you're a part of it with your Ethereum account, right? Maybe you should stop saying address. We should say account, right? Is what's part of it. And you are probably a part of a bunch of other things, right, that you want to keep on top of. And so there should be this really, really easy way to just press a button, and then we say, in this global calendar, right, which is what we're building, what are all of the clubs and communities and creators and brands that you are a part of? And then say, add them all to your calendar, right? Keep you up to date on all of them. It should just be effortless, right? Like 1 tap or 2 taps, to say
Right.
like, give me all of the things happening in all of my Ethereum clubs and brands and communities. And the place that the product kind of gets there today is that in a frame, and I think this frame is pinned somewhere, probably our channel. Um, you can tap and then tap again. So two taps to add Eventcaster to your Google or Apple calendar. And super seamless. You add a subscription, and then anytime you do anything on Eventcaster, you see an event in the feed, you sign up, you join a club, whatever. Um, that gets added to your calendar, and it updates in real time. So if things change, if you get approved for something, or if you're on the list, right, like the details update right in your native calendar with just a few taps. And so what does it not do today, right? It doesn't go out and find all the communities that you're a part of already. And to some extent, right, like not every community is using it yet, right? It doesn't have the full on like network effect of having being massive, right? So there's all these steps again that have to happen. But like the vision is there to be able to say, well, you can sign in with your Ethereum address, or it's, in this case, your Farcaster ID, right? And then pull down your activity on the global calendar and put it right into the app you already use today. Like that's composability. And that's available in the product today.
Yeah, that is really cool. I did not know that. And so basically I just need to spend more time sort of seeing
Again,
what is already available.
Yeah, it does not do a great job of telling, like, to be fair, again, like work in progress, right? We don't even have a landing page, right? You just go to it and it's literally the calendar on Farcaster. So there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen in the next month or two to really make all of this clear. And I kind of underrated it until now. And so in the process of catching up, if we're being totally honest.
No, I mean, regardless, it's just very interesting. I just have had this sort of like paradigm shift on what I thought Eventcaster was, from like something that I sign up for events here and there to decentralized, sort of like interoperable crypto calendar. And I know it's both, but I didn't have that sort of like longer term vision in mind, and I wasn't sort of aware of how well a calendar as like sort of a digital protocol like lends itself towards being cryptofied, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So the other question, I know we're like coming up on time, but the other thing I've been putting off for a while, I keep meaning to get to, is this issue of like identity, because obviously this is going to be somewhat important to you guys, where currently you're operating like mostly with on like within Farcaster, and so like Fname is sort of like the obvious thing to use. But even within Farcaster, there's sort of a question of like, there's Fnames, but that, which is like sort of the usernames, the at whatever it is. For me, it's like at Jake. For you, at Matthew. Not to be confused with the display name, which for me is just Jake, without the at. And so there's like these usernames, and for most people it's like an F name, which like stands for Farcaster name, I guess. But for some other people, it's actually basically their ENS address with an at in front of it. And in that case, I don't know if it's considered like an F name still, but it's basically an ENS name. Like you have to have the ENS name in order to have the .eth version of the F name or whatever. And so even on Farcaster, to some extent, or on Warpcast, I guess, it's sort of like not totally concrete as to being one identity system. There's kind of two that are mostly cleanly built into one. But then when you get beyond that, it's like, okay, there's ENS names that are used well outside of Farcaster. There's now base names, which it seems like base is going to be pushing. And I think at some point it'll probably be not .base.eth, but just .base, or maybe even something simpler potentially, I guess. And so you've got at least three sort of competing identity systems right there with F names, ENS names, and base names, and then you've got these other people on like Lens. I like I said, I don't really use Lens, but even from the very few apps that I use, like the two main crypto apps that I use, the two really only ones besides wallets that I'm using like every day, are Warpcast and Zora, and those have different naming systems or like identity systems, and then like a third one that I started playing around with a little bit more recently, had it downloaded for a while, but I just like I'm still not using it every day. But I think I'm pretty bullish on it. I think it's very interesting. Is Interface,
Hmm.
and Interface also has their own separate identity system, and so, but all of these tie back ultimately to an Ethereum address, basically. And so, what I'm sort of wondering, and I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on this. It's sort of an independent thing from Eventcaster, though it relates. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on like if you've experienced that sort of issue yourself in terms of like all these various identities, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on where it might go or where it should go, but it just seems to me it's
Yeah.
like, there's got to be something to tie all of this together, but it's kind of hard because like if I have, Jake on as my F name, but I can't get Jake.eth, it's like, well, I don't want to like forfeit my ability to use my Jake identity. Like I like that the best. And there's going to be people, same with the guy who has the ETH name, Farcaster, he ends up wanting to go on Farcaster and he has Jake.eth. Like he doesn't want to have to get the F name at Jake because he already has Jake.eth. He feels like he should be able to use that. And so there's like all these different people who have claims on these different names in these different identity systems, but it seems like it would be optimal overall to have one human readable reference besides the actual Ethereum address. I don't know
Yeah. Well,
if you have thoughts on that.
I have a couple of thoughts. They might be kind of unrelated or like kind of like disconnected, but I mean, on one very basic level, I just think it's very cool that you have the Ethereum address, right? And that is the source of truth for all of this. And just to go back to the calendar for a second, like I have like 10 email addresses, right? You could invite any of them to a calendar event, and maybe I don't get them, right? Because I haven't added that Google Calendar to my iPhone, right, operating system. And so it's really cool that like you just start off with the Ethereum address at a very basic level as the source of truth, and then you work your way up with all these things on top of it. I think that's super cool. Another kind of, again, disconnected thought is I've seen, for example, on like splits, this on-chain, it's like a bunch of things, right? But like the thing I'm talking about is their on-chain teams product, right? So you can manage your money on chain, kind of like a multi-sig kind of product. And they let you send money to a Farcaster address or ID. So you can search up someone's Farcaster username and it will populate their connected address because Farcaster lets you verify that you own certain addresses. And then it will let you send money to them. And that's an example of, right, this decentralized namespace, or actually, I mean, not to get in the weeds, the Farcaster's namespace actually isn't decentralized in the same way that like ENS is. But,
Right.
it lets you kind of use this composable namespace on this decentralized protocol in another product. And so these things kind of interoperate with each other. And I think that's super, super cool. It's not something that you really do today with that many other products. And then, so that's just another thought. And then the third thought, and I think this is something that Eventcaster can really kind of make more obvious to people, is that I think subdomains, ENS subdomains, so Coinbase base names is an example of this, right? Like jake.base.eth. I did not get matthew.base.eth, unfortunately. But that's another one, right? I think subdomains are very underrated, but not for the reason they're used today. So Coinbase, our Base has them as like their identity system on Base, which is cool. And like maybe that is the way things go. And I think that's interesting on some level. But I think the more interesting thing to me is that the properties or the assets have subdomains. So let's say you had, you had Jake, Jake, it's Pod of Jake, right? Is the name of your podcast. The other
Right.
one, right? Let's say you had Pod of Jake .events.xyz, right? And that was just like where you kept all of your episodes on chain and like notify your on chain audience when things happen, like when an episode goes live. That's an Ethereum address, right? That if you turn that into an ENS subdomain, people can send money to it. Like it can send things to other people, right? If it sends like a collectible, or maybe like, maybe you do a live show, right? And you have tickets, you can send things from that address. Like that's really cool. That the asset itself can have an identity on this Ethereum thing, and that it is human readable in the same way an email address is. Like that's the thing that I'm actually really, really interested in. And you can enable it with a bunch of these domain TLDs like of XYZ. I think it's not super well understandable. Like maybe I'm just an idiot, right? But like I still kind of don't understand how to do all of this. But like to me, that's really, really underrated and something that, in the future I really want to bring into the product, especially as it starts to do more with money and with assets, which is coming. And so yeah, I'm curious to see how that unfolds. But basically, like putting subdomains on assets and properties as opposed to just like humans that are using a product is the gist there.
Yeah, I think it's at the end of the day, it's just still feels pretty early, and so it's difficult to predict how exactly these, I guess, primitives or identities are going to be used. Is identities even the right word for them? Similarly to how like we started calling these crypto things, wallets, but like is wallet even the right term? And there's an argument that it definitely is, but I think there's also arguments that there could be other names that maybe might have been better suited for wallets, or that might have led wallets to developing in a different direction. For example, maybe more like a browser. And then the wallet is just sort of like this invisible element in that browser or something like that. And it's like much less focus on the wallet. And I think Coinbase seems to be somewhat experimenting with this. Obviously, they added browser within like the Coinbase Wallet mobile app a while ago, but now Coinbase Smart Wallet is very much like an invisible thing that works with any browser. And if you go to like Coinbase Wallet now, it's like much less of a focus on actually like your portfolio of holdings and more so on like what you can do in crypto, which is kind of an interesting shift. I think, maybe some people don't really like that, but maybe others do. And maybe that just sort of shows that a different direction is possible, if nothing else, and might be a good idea. So anyway, there's a lot of, sort of ambiguity, but it's all interesting to think about and to talk about. And I know we're up on time now, but this was a lot of fun. I hope we'll do it again. This is just the 5th recording, I think, of this Purple People podcast for me. So I'm looking forward to doing more of it. But thanks for taking the time. Great conversation. And obviously we were pretty focused on Eventcaster today, and because it was interesting stuff. But I know we've got a lot more interests in common to talk about in the future as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. This is awesome. I look forward to listening to all the episodes. And let's talk again. I'm sure this stuff moves so quickly. So I'm sure we'll have a whole host of new things to talk about. Eventcaster will have evolved a bunch. So yeah, I'm excited to chat again.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, I'll talk soon.
See you later.